The cold metal walls of the spaceship New Frontier hummed with energy as it moved through the dark space toward the ice planet Cryos 7. Jake Morrison sat on a metal bench in the cargo bay, checking his gear one last time. His thick hands moved over each item with care. A knife, rope, water purifier, emergency beacon, and basic medical supplies. That was all he was allowed to take around him. The other contestants prepared for what many called the most dangerous challenge in the galaxy. Jake watched them with quiet interest. These were not ordinary beings. They were the toughest fighters and survivors from different worlds, each one believing they would win. Zephyr 9 stood near the viewing window, his crystal body catching the light from distant stars. The ethereal being was beautiful in a strange way. His body was made of living crystal that glowed with soft blue light. When he moved, the light patterns changed like water flowing over glass. The ethereals were known across the galaxy for their ability to survive in the vacuum of space. They could live without air for days, and their crystal bodies could heal from almost any damage. On the other side of the room, Thrakmound checked his natural armor. The Chitauri warrior was huge, standing nearly 8 feet tall. His body was covered in thick plates of natural armor that looked like black metal. 4 arms moved with deadly grace as he tested his joints and flexibility. The Chitauri were famous warriors who could survive in environments that would kill most other species. Their armor could stop energy blasts, and their strength was legendary. Jake looked down at his own body. He was just a human. No natural armor, no crystal healing, no special powers. At 6 feet tall, with brown hair and weathered skin, he looked ordinary next to these alien champions. He had served in the military for 10 years, working as an engineer in some of the worst places on Earth. After that, he spent 5 years as a survival instructor, teaching people how to stay alive in dangerous places. But compared to his competition, he seemed weak. Commander Vex Kaller entered the cargo bay. The Saurian officer was tall and thin, with green scales that reflected the ship's lights. His cold yellow eyes looked at each contestant. When his gaze fell on Jake, his forked tongue flicked out in what Jake had learned was a sign of disgust. "Human," Vex Kaller said, his voice coming through a translator device that made it sound like metal scraping on stone. "I must ask one final time. Are you certain you wish to continue with this challenge?" Jake stood up slowly, meeting the alien's stare. "I'm sure, Commander." "Your species has no natural defenses against extreme cold," the Saurian continued. "Your skin is thin. Your body produces insufficient heat. You have no armor, no ability to enter hibernation, no crystal structure to protect your organs. The other contestants have evolved for survival. You have evolved for ... making tools." Thrakmound clicked his mandibles, which Jake had learned was the Chitauri version of laughter. "The soft skin will not last one day," the warrior said through his own translator. "Perhaps we should bring extra emergency beacons for when he fails." Zephyr 9's light patterns shifted to what Jake recognized as amusement. "The human's internal temperature is already dropping just from the ship's air conditioning," the ethereal observed. "This will be brief." Jake smiled and picked up his pack. "We'll see about that." The ship's intercom crackled to life. "All contestants to the drop bay. We have reached Cryos 7. They walked through the ship's corridors to the drop bay, where Dr. Elena Vasquez waited with her monitoring equipment. The human scientist was the only other person from Earth on the mission. She looked worried as she attached the bio-monitoring device to Jake's chest. "Are you really sure about this?" she asked quietly. "The temperature readings from the surface are worse than we expected. It's hitting minus 70 degrees Celsius, and that's during the day." Jake nodded. "I've been in cold before, Elena. I know what I'm doing." "This isn't Alaska, Jake. This is an alien world where the ground is frozen, solid for miles down. The other contestants have natural advantages you don't have." "Maybe," Jake said, checking his emergency beacon. "But I have something they don't." "What's that?" Jake looked out the window at the white and gray surface of Cryos 7 below. The planet looked like a giant snowball floating in space. "I know how to build things." Captain Roy Bennett joined them at the window. The ship's commander was an older man with gray hair and worried eyes. "The weather report is getting worse," he said. "There's a major storm system moving in. It'll hit the drop zones in about 18 hours. Can we delay the drop?" Dr. Vasquez asked. Commander Vexcaler overheard and turned toward them. "The challenge begins as scheduled. Weather conditions are part of the test. If the contestants cannot handle a simple storm, they do not deserve to win." Jake watched the planet grow larger as they approached. The surface was covered in ice and snow, with strange crystal formations jutting up like frozen trees. Here and there, he could see the dark spots that marked impact craters from ancient meteor strikes. The planet had no real atmosphere, just a thin layer of gases that provided no protection from the cold of space. "Drop positions confirmed," announced the ship's pilot. "Contestants will be placed at locations approximately 50 kilometers apart. Emergency extraction will be available, but only in life-threatening situations." Jake felt the ship begin to shake as they entered what little atmosphere the planet had. Through the window, he could see the surface rushing up to meet them. The ice seemed to go on forever, broken only by those strange crystal formations and the occasional dark crater. "Final equipment check," Commander Vexcaler ordered. Jake went through his gear one more time. Everything was standard issue, the same equipment given to all contestants. No special tools, no advanced technology, just basic survival gear that any species could use. The rules were simple. Survive for 7 days using only what you brought and what you could find on the planet. The drop bay doors opened with a mechanical whine. Cold air rushed in, making Jake's breath visible in white puffs. Even inside his thermal suit, he could feel the temperature drop. His fellow contestants seemed unaffected. Zephyr 9's crystal body actually seemed to glow brighter in the cold, while Thrakmound's armor showed no signs of frost. "First drop in 30 seconds, the pilot announced. Jake moved to his drop pod, a small metal capsule that would protect him during the fall to the surface. As he climbed inside, he could hear Thrakmound speaking to Zephyr 9. "How long do you think the human will last?" the Chitauri warrior asked. 6 hours, Zephyr 9 replied. "Maybe less if he panics." Jake sealed his pod and felt it detach from the ship. Through the small window, he watched Cryo 7 fill his view. The surface rushed toward him, white and cold and deadly. As his pod's parachute deployed, he began to plan. The other contestants were thinking about this wrong. They were focused on surviving the cold, on enduring the harsh conditions until the 7 days were up. But Jake had learned something different. During his years in the military and as a survival instructor, the key to survival wasn't just enduring bad conditions. The key was changing the conditions themselves. His pod hit the surface with a jarring impact, throwing him against the padded walls. When everything stopped moving, Jake opened the door and stepped out onto the frozen surface of Cryo 7. The cold hit him like a physical blow, even through his thermal suit. His breath came out in great white clouds that froze and fell to the ground like snow, but Jake was already moving, already planning. While his competitors looked for shelter, he began to gather materials. This wasn't just about surviving the cold. This was about beating it entirely. The challenge had begun. Jake's boots crunched on the frozen ground as he walked away from his landing pod. The cold was already trying to get through his thermal suit, but he ignored it. He had work to do. While the other contestants were probably looking for caves or cracks in the ice to hide in, Jake had a different plan. He pulled out a small device from his pack and held it up. The scanner beeped softly as it read the area around him. Most people would use it to find water or check air quality. Jake was using it to find something else entirely. After a few minutes of walking, the device started beeping faster. "There you are," Jake said to himself. The ground beneath his feet felt different, warmer. The scanner showed heat signatures coming from below the ice. Geothermal vents, most planets had them, even frozen ones like Cryo 7. They were cracks in the planet's surface where heat from the planet's core leaked out. Usually they were too small to matter, but Jake knew how to make them work for him. He started digging with his knife. And a metal plate from his emergency kit. The ice was hard, but not impossible to break. After an hour of careful work, he found what he was looking for. A small crack in the rock where warm air was seeping out. Not much, but enough. Jake set down his pack and began to inventory what he had found so far. The landing area was full of useful materials. Pieces of metal from old spacecraft that had crashed on the planet over the years. Strange crystal formations that reflected light and heat. Frozen vegetation that could be processed into useful materials. Most importantly, he had found several sources of the geothermal heat he needed on the orbital station above. Dr. Elena Vasquez watched the bio readings from all the contestants. Her computer screen showed 4 different sets of data. 3 of them were concerning. Zephyr 9's crystal structure was already showing stress fractures from the cold. The ethereal's body temperature was dropping faster than expected. Thrackmound was doing better, but his movement had slowed significantly as his body tried to conserve heat. Then there was Jake's reading. His core temperature was stable. His heart rate was elevated, but not from stress, from work, physical labor. "What is he doing down there?" she asked Captain Bennett. "According to his beacon, he's been moving around constantly since he landed," Bennett replied. The other contestants found shelter within the first hour. "Jake has been walking around for 6 hours straight. In this cold? That should be impossible." Bennett looked at the readings again. Maybe he knows something we don't. Down. On the surface, Jake continued his work. He had identified the perfect location for his project. A small depression in the ice that was protected from the wind, with 2 geothermal vents nearby and plenty of salvageable materials. He began the most important work of his life. First, he needed walls. Jake gathered pieces of metal from crashed spacecraft, most of them twisted and bent but still usable. He used his knife to cut and shape them, creating interlocking panels. The work was slow and difficult in the cold, but Jake had learned patience during his military service. As he worked, he thought about the other contestants. They were probably huddled in whatever shelter they could find, trying to conserve body heat and waiting for the challenge to end. That was a losing strategy. The cold would eventually win. Jake's plan was different. He wasn't going to fight the cold. He was going to defeat it. The first wall went up after 3 hours of work. It wasn't pretty, but it was functional. Jake had created a windbreak that immediately made the area more comfortable. He could feel the difference as soon as he stepped behind it. The wind had been stealing his body heat constantly. Now it was blocked, but walls were just the beginning. Jake began work on the most important part of his shelter, the heating system. He had found 2 geothermal vents that were close enough to work with. Using metal plates and careful positioning, he started building a heat exchanger. The idea was simple: channel the warm air from the vents into his shelter while keeping the cold air out. The work was precise and difficult. Jake had to shape the metal by hand, using rocks as hammers and his knife as a cutting tool. His hands were getting numb. Despite his gloves, but he kept working. Every piece had to fit perfectly, or the whole system would fail. As the first day turned into night, the temperature dropped even further. Jake's emergency beacon showed -80°C. The wind picked up, howling across the ice like a living thing. This was when most contestants would be fighting for their lives, burning through their emergency supplies and hoping to last. Until morning. Jake was installing his roof. He had created a double wall system using salvaged metal and packed snow for insulation. The snow was an old trick he had learned in Alaska. It trapped air, which made it an excellent insulator. Most people thought snow was cold, but Jake knew better. Snow could keep you warm if you used it right. The heating system was working better than he had hoped. Warm air from the geothermal vents was flowing into his shelter through carefully positioned channels. The heat was gentle but constant, exactly what he needed. Jake had created a positive pressure system that pushed cold air out while drawing warm air in on the orbital station. Dr. Vasquez was staring at her screen in disbelief. "This can't be right," she said. "What's wrong?" Captain Bennett asked. "Jake's core temperature isn't just stable anymore. It's rising. According to these readings, he's actually warmer now than when he started." Bennett looked at the data. That's impossible. The surface temperature has dropped 20 degrees since sunset. I know what the readings say, but look at this. Vasquez pointed to her screen. His stress indicators are down. His heart rate is normal. According to every measurement we have, Jake Morrison is not just surviving in those conditions. He's comfortable. Commander Vexcaller slithered over to look at the data. The Saurian's cold blood made him sensitive to temperature changes, and he found the readings difficult to believe. There must be an error in the equipment, he said. I've checked it 3 times, Vasquez replied. The readings are accurate. The commander looked at the data for the other contestants. Zephyr 9's condition was getting worse. The ethereal's crystal body was developing serious fractures as the cold affected his molecular structure. Thrackmound was in a state of semi-hibernation, barely moving to conserve energy. Both of them were consuming emergency supplies at a dangerous rate. How is this possible? Vexcaller asked. I think, Vasquez said slowly, we underestimated him. Down on the surface, Jake put the finishing touches on his shelter. It wasn't large, but it was perfect for his needs. The heating system was working flawlessly, maintaining a comfortable temperature inside while the deadly cold raged outside. He had built-in storage areas for his supplies, a work area where he could maintain his equipment, and even a small area where he could rest, but Jake wasn't done yet. He pulled out his water purifier and began setting up a water recycling system. Using the heat from his geothermal system, he could melt ice and purify it for drinking. The warm, moist air created by this process would make his shelter even more comfortable. As he worked, Jake thought about what the other contestants must be going through. They were probably cold, hungry, and scared. They were using their emergency supplies and counting the hours until the challenge ended. They were surviving, but barely. Jake looked around his shelter. The temperature was a comfortable 15 degrees Celsius. His water system was providing clean drinking water. His heating system was running automatically, requiring no input from him. He had food, warmth, and comfort. He wasn't just surviving. He was living. The storm that Captain Bennett had warned about was approaching. Through his shelter's small window, Jake could see the dark clouds building on the horizon. The wind was getting stronger, and the temperature was dropping even further. This storm would be the real test of his shelter. Jake checked his systems one more time. Everything was working perfectly. The storm could bring winds of 200 kilometers per hour and temperatures of minus 90 degrees. His competitors would be fighting for their lives. Jake Morrison would be warm, dry, and comfortable. And tomorrow he would start making improvements. The storm hit Cryo 7 like a giant fist. Wind screamed across the frozen surface at speeds that would tear apart anything not properly secured. The temperature plummeted to minus 90 degrees Celsius. Ice crystals flew through the air like tiny bullets, and the sound was deafening even through the thin atmosphere. Inside his thermal shelter, Jake Morrison sat comfortably and listened to the storm rage outside. The walls of his shelter barely shook. His heating system hummed quietly, maintaining a steady temperature of 15 degrees Celsius. He had built his shelter well, and it was proving itself against the worst weather the planet could throw at it. Jake looked at his emergency beacon. The small device showed that communication with the orbital station had been cut off by the storm. He was on his own until the weather cleared, but that didn't worry him. He had everything he needed. On the orbital station, Dr. Elena Vasquez stared at her blank monitoring screens with growing concern. The storm had knocked out communication with all the contestants. The last readings she had received were troubling. Zephyr 9's biosigns were critical. The ethereal's crystal body was fracturing badly, and his energy levels were dangerously low. Thrackmound had entered full hibernation mode, his body shutting down non-essential functions to conserve heat. And then there was Jake. His last readings showed him in perfect condition, sitting in what the sensors indicated was a comfortable, climate-controlled environment. It seemed impossible, but the data didn't lie. How long until we can re-establish contact? Captain Bennett asked. The storm is expected to last at least 12 hours, Vasquez replied. Maybe longer. We won't know. their status until it passes. Commander Vex Kaller paced the monitoring station, his scaled feet clicking on the metal floor. "This is unprecedented," he said. "No contestant has ever faced conditions this severe. We may need to initiate emergency extractions." "For who?" Vasquez asked. "For all of them. No being can survive this storm." Down on the surface, Jake was proving the commander wrong. Not only was he surviving, he was thriving. The storm provided him with an unexpected opportunity. The high winds were bringing new materials to his location. Pieces of ice, metal debris, and even some organic matter were being deposited near his shelter. When the wind died down slightly, Jake put on his improved thermal suit and ventured outside. He had modified his original suit using materials from his shelter, adding extra insulation and a heating system powered by small thermal cells he had created. The suit allowed him to work outside for short periods. Even in the deadly cold, he gathered the new materials the storm had brought him. More metal pieces, some with interesting properties. Frozen plants that could be processed into useful compounds. Most importantly, he found several containers of chemicals from old crashed ships. These would be perfect for his next project. Back inside his shelter, Jake began expanding his living space. He had proven that his thermal system could keep him warm and comfortable. Now he wanted to see how far he could push the concept. Using the new materials, he began construction of a second chamber. The work was precise and methodical. Jake had learned during his military service that good engineering required patience and attention to detail. Each piece of metal had to be cut and shaped by hand. Each connection had to be perfect, or the whole system would fail. As he worked, Jake thought about what made humans different from the other species in the challenge. The ethereals had evolved to survive in the vacuum of space, but they were specialized for one environment. The Chitauri were incredibly strong and tough, but they relied on their natural armor and physical abilities. Both species had evolved to be perfect for certain conditions. Humans were different. They hadn't evolved to be perfect for any one environment. Instead, they had evolved to change their environment to suit their needs. That was their real strength. Not claws or armor or crystal bodies, but the ability to build tools and systems that could overcome any obstacle. Jake's second chamber was taking shape. It would serve as a workshop where he could build and repair equipment. The heating system extended perfectly into the new space, maintaining the same comfortable temperature as the main shelter. He even installed a small ventilation system that would keep the air fresh and clean, but Jake wasn't satisfied with just building a better shelter. He wanted to push the boundaries of what was possible. Using the chemicals he had found, he began working on his most ambitious project yet. He was going to make hot tea. The idea seemed ridiculous. Here he was on one of the most hostile planets in the galaxy, in conditions that were killing his competitors, and he was thinking about making a hot beverage. But to Jake, it represented something important. It was proof that he wasn't just surviving, he was living comfortably. The process was complex. First, he needed to purify water to a higher standard than his basic system could provide. Using the chemicals and some clever engineering, he built a distillation system that could produce perfectly clean water. The system used waste heat from his thermal generators, making it efficient and sustainable. Next, he needed something to make tea from. The frozen vegetation he had collected looked promising. Jake carefully processed the plant matter, drying it using heated air from his system and testing small amounts to make sure it was safe. The result was a crude but functional herbal tea blend. Finally, he needed a way to heat the water and brew the tea. This was the easy part. His thermal system provided plenty of heat, and he had containers that could serve as a teapot and cup. Jake had built more complex devices from scratch. When the storm finally began to weaken, Jake sat in his comfortable shelter with a steaming cup of herbal tea. The liquid was hot and flavorful, a perfect complement to the warm, dry air of his shelter. Outside, the wind still howled and the temperature was still deadly. But inside, Jake Morrison was enjoying afternoon tea. His emergency beacon crackled to life as communication was restored. The orbital station was trying to contact all contestants. To check their status, Jake activated his beacon and sent a status report. All systems functioning normally. Health status excellent. No assistance required. On the orbital station, Dr. Vasquez received Jake's transmission and stared at it in disbelief. "This can't be right," she said. "What's wrong?" Captain Bennett asked. "Jake's transmission. He's reporting that all systems are functioning normally. His bio readings show he's in perfect health, but look at this." She pointed to a secondary reading from his beacon. "His shelter is showing internal temperature readings of 15 degrees Celsius. The external temperature is minus 90 degrees. That's a difference of over 100 degrees, Bennett said. "How is that possible?" "I don't know, but there's more. His beacon is also detecting water vapor in the air, which suggests he has a functioning atmospheric system. And look at this energy signature. It's consistent with active heating and possibly even cooking." Commander Vex Kaller joined them at the monitoring station. "What is the status of the other contestants?" he asked. Vasquez checked her other screens. "We're still trying to re-establish contact with Zephyr 9. His last readings were critical. Thrackmound is responding, but barely. He's in deep hibernation and his supplies are running low." "And the human?" "The human is asking if we need any assistance from his end." The commander's yellow eyes widened. "He's offering to help us?" That's what his message says. "He's asking if there's anything he can do to assist with the challenge operations." The three officers looked at each other in stunned silence. They had expected to be managing emergency evacuations and possibly fatalities. Instead, they had one contestant offering to help them run the challenge. Down on the surface, Jake finished his tea and began planning his next improvement. The storm had brought him new materials, and he had several ideas for expanding his shelter complex. Maybe a third chamber for food storage and preparation. Maybe a workshop area where he could build more advanced tools. He looked out the window of his shelter at the still raging storm. The wind was starting to die down, but the temperature was still deadly. In a few hours, the storm would pass and the other contestants would emerge from whatever shelter they had found. They would be cold, hungry, and exhausted. Jake would be warm, comfortable, and ready to tackle whatever challenges the planet threw at him next. He was no longer just surviving the test. He was mastering it. The emergency beacon chimed with an incoming message from the orbital station. Dr. Vasquez's voice came through clearly. "Jake, this is Dr. Vasquez. Please confirm your status and location. We're reading some unusual data from your beacon." Jake smiled and keyed his transmitter. "This is Jake Morrison. Status is excellent. I'm currently in my shelter enjoying some tea and planning tomorrow's construction projects. Is there anything you need from me up there?" The silence that followed told Jake everything he needed to know. He had done something that no one had expected. He had turned a survival challenge into a comfortable living situation. And he was just getting started. The storm passed during the night, leaving behind a landscape of fresh ice and scattered debris. Jake Morrison woke up in his warm shelter feeling completely rested. He had slept better than he had in weeks, comfortable in the steady heat provided by his thermal system. Outside, the temperature had risen to minus 70 degrees Celsius, which was practically tropical compared to the storm conditions. Jake stretched and looked around his shelter complex. It now consisted of 3 connected chambers: the main living area where he slept and relaxed, the workshop where he built and repaired equipment, and the newest addition, which he had finished during the storm. This third chamber served as a greenhouse where he was attempting to grow edible plants using heat from his geothermal system. The greenhouse was Jake's proudest achievement so far. He had used transparent materials salvaged from crashed ships to create windows that let in the weak sunlight while keeping the heat inside. The soil came from organic matter he had processed from frozen vegetation, mixed with minerals he had extracted from the ice. The growing medium was kept warm by pipes that carried heated water from his thermal system. Small green shoots were already emerging from the soil. Jake had planted seeds from emergency rations and some wild seeds he had found in the frozen plants. The growth was slow but steady, proving that it was possible to create life even in this deadly environment. His emergency beacon chirped with an incoming message. Jake, this is Dr. Vasquez. We need to discuss your situation. Your bio readings are showing things that shouldn't be possible. Jake smiled and keyed his transmitter. Good morning, Dr. Vasquez. I'm doing fine down here. What specifically are you concerned about? Your beacon is showing internal atmospheric readings that suggest you have a fully functional life support system. Temperature control, air purification, water recycling, even what looks like food production. How is this possible with basic survival gear? Jake looked around his shelter complex. She was right, of course. He had built a complete life support system using nothing but salvaged materials and basic engineering principles. To him, it seemed like common sense. To everyone else, it apparently seemed impossible. I used the materials that were available, Jake replied. The planet has everything you need if you know how to use it. Geothermal energy for heat, ice for water, crashed ships for materials, and organic matter for growing things. It's all here. Jake, you've created a habitat that rivals our orbital station in terms of life support capability, using scrap metal and a knife. Engineering is engineering, Dr. Vasquez. The principles work the same whether you're building a space station or a survival shelter. On the orbital station, Dr. Vasquez looked at Captain Bennett with amazement. He's treating this like a routine construction project, she said. Like building a house instead of surviving on a death world. What's the status of the other contestants? Bennett asked. Vasquez checked her screens. Zephyr 9 is in critical condition. His crystal structure is badly damaged, and we're preparing for emergency extraction. Thrackmound is still in hibernation, but his vital signs are stable. He might make it through the challenge, but he'll be in no condition to do anything except survive. And Jake? Jake is asking if he can help with the extractions. Commander Vexcaller approached the monitoring station. The Saurian officer looked tired and confused. I have received communications from the Galactic Council, he said. They are demanding explanations for the humans' performance. Several species are questioning whether humans have been hiding their true capabilities. What do we tell them? Bennett asked. I do not know. This challenges everything we thought we knew about human limitations. Down on the surface, Jake was working on his latest project. He had decided to build a second shelter complex, not for himself, but as a potential rescue station for other contestants. The work was ambitious, but Jake had proven that he could build anything he needed given enough time and materials. The new shelter would be larger than his, original and designed to accommodate different species with different environmental needs. Jake had been studying the biodata from his fellow contestants and had ideas for how to help them. Zephyr 9 needed a controlled environment that could help his crystal structure heal. Thrackmound needed a warming station that could bring him out of hibernation safely. As he worked, Jake thought about the challenge and what it was supposed to prove. The Galactic Council had created this test to determine which species were the most adaptable and capable of surviving in extreme conditions. The assumption had been that species with natural advantages would perform better, but Jake was proving that assumption wrong. Natural advantages were useful, but they could also be limitations. The ethereals were perfect for space environments, but they couldn't adapt to extreme cold. The Chitauri were incredibly tough, but they could only survive by shutting down when conditions became too harsh. Humans were different. They had evolved not to be perfect for any one environment, but to be capable of adapting to any environment. That adaptability came not from physical advantages, but from intelligence and creativity. The ability to see problems and engineer solutions. Jake's emergency beacon crackled with an urgent message. All contestants, this is Commander Vexcaller. We are initiating emergency extraction procedures for contestant Zephyr 9. His condition is critical and requires immediate medical attention. Jake stopped his work and keyed his transmitter. Commander, this is Jake Morrison. I'm receiving Zephyr 9's distress signal. His location is approximately 20 kilometers from my position. I can reach him in about 4 hours if the weather holds. Negative, Jake Morrison. You are not authorized to leave your designated survival area. Emergency extraction will be handled by orbital rescue teams. Commander, with respect, your rescue teams can't operate in these surface conditions. The atmospheric interference is too strong for your transporters, and landing a shuttle in this terrain would be extremely dangerous. I can reach him safely and provide immediate assistance. There was a long pause. Jake could imagine the discussion taking place on the orbital station. The rules of the challenge were clear. Contestants were supposed to survive on their own. But Jake was offering to risk his own safety to help a fellow contestant. Jake Morrison, if you leave your survival area, you will be disqualified from the challenge. Jake looked around his comfortable shelter complex. He had built a home on an alien world, created a sustainable life support system, and proven that humans could not only survive but thrive in impossible conditions. The challenge had already been won, even if the judges didn't realize it yet. Commander, I understand the rules, but I'm not going to let someone die when I can help them. I'm going after Zephyr 9. Jake began preparing for the rescue mission. He would need to modify his thermal suit for extended outdoor use in the extreme cold. He would need supplies for medical treatment and emergency shelter construction. Most importantly, he would need to build a transport system that could safely carry an injured ethereal across 20 kilometers of frozen terrain. The work took him 3 hours. Jake created a sled system using metal runners and thermal padding. He modified his suit with extra heating elements and extended life support. He prepared emergency medical supplies and materials for building a temporary shelter if needed. As he prepared to leave his shelter, Jake's beacon received another message. This time it was from Dr. Vasquez, speaking privately on a secure channel. Jake, are you sure about this? You're risking everything you've accomplished. Your shelter, your safety, your chance to win the challenge. Jake sealed his modified thermal suit and checked his equipment one final time. Dr. Vasquez, I didn't come here to win a challenge. I came here to prove what humans are capable of. And humans don't leave their friends behind. He stepped out of his shelter into the deadly cold of Cryo 7. The temperature was minus 70 degrees Celsius, and the wind was picking up again. Another storm was approaching, and if he didn't reach Zephyr 9 soon, they would both be caught in it. Jake activated his emergency beacon and began the long journey across the frozen terrain. Behind him, his shelter complex continued to function perfectly, a testament to human engineering and determination. Ahead of him lay 20 kilometers of the most dangerous terrain in the galaxy, and at the end of that journey a fellow being who needed help. Jake Morrison had already proven that humans could survive anything. Now he was going to prove that they would risk everything to save a friend. The journey across the frozen landscape of Cryo 7 was the most dangerous thing Jake Morrison had ever attempted. The temperature was minus 70 degrees Celsius, and dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. Another storm was coming, and if it caught him in the open, even his modified thermal suit wouldn't be enough to save him. Jake pulled his sled behind him, loaded with rescue equipment and materials for building emergency shelter. The runners he had made from salvaged metal slid smoothly across the ice, but the weight made every step a struggle. His breath came out in great white clouds that froze instantly and fell to the ground like snow. After 2 hours of walking, Jake's suit started showing warning signs. The heating elements were working harder than designed, draining power faster than expected. He would need to reach Zephyr 9 soon or risk his own survival. The beacon signal was getting stronger. Jake followed it across a field of crystal formations that jutted from the ice like frozen trees. The crystals were beautiful but dangerous, sharp enough to cut through his suit if he wasn't careful. He navigated between them slowly, protecting his equipment and himself. Finally, Jake saw something that didn't belong. A metallic shape half buried in the ice. Zephyr 9's emergency shelter was barely visible, almost completely covered by snow and ice from the storm. Jake hurried toward it, his heart racing with concern. The shelter was a standard survival pod, designed to keep someone alive for a few days in extreme conditions. But it was never meant to handle the kind of weather Cryo 7 had thrown at them. Ice had formed around the seals and the heating system had failed. Inside, Zephyr 9 would be slowly freezing to death. Jake connected his suit's power system to the shelter's door mechanism and forced it open. Inside, he found the ethereal in terrible condition. Zephyr 9's crystal body was covered in fractures, and his bioluminescent glow was barely visible. The being was unconscious, his body's energy reserves nearly exhausted. "Hang on, friend," Jake said, even though he knew the ethereal couldn't hear him. "I'm getting you out of here." Jake had studied ethereal physiology during his preparation for the challenge. Their crystal bodies needed specific conditions to function properly. Too much heat would damage their molecular structure, but too little would cause them to lose cohesion and die. Jake needed to warm Zephyr 9 gradually while protecting his damaged crystal form. Working quickly, Jake set up an emergency heating system using portable thermal units from his pack. He wrapped the ethereal in specially designed thermal blankets that would distribute heat evenly across his crystal structure. The process was delicate and dangerous. One mistake could shatter Zephyr 9's body completely. As Jake worked, the storm he had been worried about finally arrived. Wind began howling across the landscape, and the temperature started dropping rapidly. Soon it would be impossible to travel, and they would both be trapped in the failing shelter. Jake made a decision that would have seemed impossible to anyone watching from the orbital station. Instead of trying to get Zephyr 9 back to his shelter complex, he was going to build a new shelter right here. In the middle of a deadly storm, with limited materials and time running out, Jake Morrison was going to create a safe haven for both of them. He had brought construction materials on his sled, enough to build a small emergency shelter. But this would be different from his original shelter. This one had to be built fast, and it had to accommodate two very different species with different environmental needs. Jake worked with desperate efficiency. He used his knife and tools to cut and shape metal panels, creating a framework that could withstand the growing storm. He positioned the shelter to take advantage of a small geothermal vent he had located nearby, just enough to provide basic heating. The wind was getting stronger, making the work almost impossible. Jake's modified suit was protecting him from the cold, but the effort of construction was draining his energy reserves. He had to finish the shelter soon, or they would both die on the orbital station. Dr. Elena Vasquez watched the bio readings from both contestants with growing alarm. Jake's vital signs showed extreme stress and exertion. His suit's power levels were dropping rapidly. Zephyr 9's readings were so weak they were barely registering. "We have to do something," she said to Captain Bennett. "Jake is going to die trying to save Zephyr 9. "The storm is too strong for a rescue shuttle," Bennett replied. "We can't get through the atmospheric interference." Commander Vex Caller stood at the monitoring station, his yellow eyes fixed on the data displays. "The human is attempting something. That should be impossible," he said quietly. "He is trying to build a shelter in conditions that would kill most beings in minutes. Will he succeed?" Bennett asked. The commander was quiet for a long moment. "I do not know. But if he does, it will change everything we thought we knew about human capabilities." Down on the surface, Jake was putting the finishing touches on his emergency shelter. The structure was small but functional, with a double-wall design that would trap heat and keep the cold out. He had connected it to the geothermal vent using a simple but effective heat distribution system. Jake carefully moved Zephyr 9 into the shelter, monitoring the ethereal's condition constantly. The gradual warming process was working. The fractures in the crystal body were stabilizing, and a faint glow was returning to Zephyr 9's form. As the storm reached its peak, Jake sealed the shelter and activated his heating system. The small space quickly warmed to a comfortable temperature. Outside, the wind screamed and the temperature dropped to -90°C. Inside, both contestants were safe and warm. Jake checked his emergency beacon. Communication with the orbital station was still impossible due to the storm interference, but the beacon was recording everything. When the storm passed, the rescue teams would be able to find them. Hours passed. Jake monitored Zephyr 9's condition and made adjustments to the shelter's systems. The ethereal's crystal structure was slowly healing. the fractures closing as his body temperature stabilized. Jake's thermal regulation system was working perfectly, maintaining the precise conditions needed for both species. As Jake worked, he thought about what this rescue meant. He had risked everything to save a fellow contestant. His perfect shelter complex, his chance to win the challenge, even his own life. But it had been the right thing to do. That was what made humans different from other species. They didn't just survive. They protected each other. When the storm finally passed, Jake's emergency beacon crackled to life. "Jake Morrison, this is Dr. Vasquez. Please respond. We show your location has changed and we're reading 2 life signs at your position." Jake keyed his transmitter. "This is Jake Morrison. I have Zephyr 9 with me. His condition is stable, but he needs medical attention. We're both safe in an emergency shelter I constructed at his location." "Jake, that's impossible. The storm conditions should have killed anyone exposed to them." Jake looked around his small but perfectly functional shelter. "Dr. Vasquez, I think you're underestimating what's possible with good engineering and determination." Within hours, the rescue shuttle arrived. The crew found Jake and Zephyr 9 in a fully functional shelter that rivaled their own emergency systems. The ethereal was conscious and healing, his crystal body glowing with renewed energy. As they prepared to leave Cryo 7, Zephyr 9 approached Jake. The ethereal's bioluminescent patterns shifted to show deep gratitude. "Your species fights. Not with natural weapons," he said through his translator, "but with intelligence and compassion. This is perhaps the greatest strength of all." Jake smiled and offered the ethereal a cup of tea he had brewed in the emergency shelter. "Want some?" "I've got plenty." The rescue team returned to find Jake's original shelter complex still functioning perfectly. Steam rose from the geothermal vents, and the greenhouse was producing fresh vegetables. The habitat had become a permanent research station, proof that humans could build sustainable communities anywhere. Commander Vexcaller filed his final report with the Galactic Council. "Human survival capabilities exceed all previous estimates," he wrote. "Recommend immediate revision of species classifications. Note: human contestant completed survival challenge while maintaining recreational activities, constructing advanced habitats, and conducting rescue operations." Jake Morrison had done more than win a survival challenge. He had shown the galaxy that humans were not just another species struggling to survive. They were builders, engineers, and protectors who could turn any challenge into an opportunity. The story of the human who made tea on a frozen hell became legend throughout the galaxy. But for Jake, it was just another day at the office. After all, engineering was engineering, whether you were building a space station or saving a friend.